Sgt Burden was on his way to a fight he wouldn't survive. Walking down the corridor to the one-man ship he'd be shot out of, he couldn't help but remember how much he had endured alongside his team, which were escorting him. Torture, being trapped in a cave, abandoned on a cold, hostile alien planet, being stranded in the desert parched for water. After all that, he couldn't ask them to risk their lives on a one-way suicide mission to save the world. They were Sarah and Donald, a married couple. She was a biologist and he was an engineer. They had been with Sgt Burden when they had survived the encounters on Senekos, the planet that Liam had trapped them on. Jack, the soldier, alongside whom Burden had almost died of thirst and heat 7 years ago in the desert during the Legion War. Dr. Zenesh, whose antidote might single-handedly save billions of lives. And last but not least, Marvin, the best boy of them all, the only truly innocent one among them all. Marvin always just wanted to help. He was a good boy. Multiple times they had to pull together as a team to overcome frightening odds, all without killing nor eating each other. In the world of the gods will be watching, the Constellar Federation was a human supremacist empire, expanding across the galaxy, conquering and enslaving alien races through sheer military might, cunning, and brutality. They didn't see enslaving subjects outside of Federation as the atrocity that it was, but rather as their right through conquest. Like a spacefaring version of the Roman Empire, expanding its borders, taking prisoners, and sending them back to Rome to serve. Liam was a charismatic young leader of Xenolifer. He was going to change the galaxy and bring down the evil Constellar Empire. If the Empire was willing to enslave aliens now, how long before they needed more slaves and turned to humans? His group of extremists had gotten their hands on the ultimate biological weapon, the meduse virus, and wanted to use it to strike a blow against the Constellar Federation, destabilizing it by showing the galaxy that they can be brought down. The Constellar Federation was only opposed by the holistic empire. The meduse virus that Xenolifer now had was a specialized virus that only targeted mammals and acted as fast as a neurotoxin, eliminating its target in minutes. It was especially dangerous since Xenolifers had taken the virus from its native planet Senekos and weaponized it further, making it even deadlier. A small dose had the potential to kill all mammal life on the planet in hours. Liam and Xenolifer had their sights set on Gactus VII. It was a planet in the Constellar Federation. Gactus VII had the distinction of having the most amount of alien slaves when compared to the human population. It was a symbol of the Federation's extremes and extravagance, highlighting their status as a decadent slaving empire, like Rome at its peak. Gactus VII was a target chosen by Xenolifer, a central planet of status, a symbol of the Confederation's pride and its sins. By using the meduse virus, they would be able to eliminate the 4 billion humans on the planet and sparing all of the alien slaves under their rule. This was the path that Liam was on, regardless of the innocent blood he was going to be spilling. He was trying to cancel out one atrocity by committing another one, all in the name of freedom. Sgt Burden was an agent of the ECUK, the Everdusk company for the universal knowledge. He had gone undercover into the Xenolifer organization on behalf of Everdusk, using the alias of Sgt Abraham. Everdusk saw the Xenolifer organization as a growing threat in the galaxy and wanted to place agents in it to try to control it and minimize their damage, in case they got dangerous, which they surely did. One man was trying to save a planet of slaving humans. One man trying to save billions of alien slaves. The two men were diametrically opposed. Who is the moral one here? Is it moral to wipe out a planet of slavers? Or was it worse to let them continue on their abhorrent practice? Which atrocity was worse? Who had the authority to play God with the lives of billions and the galaxy? Who had the right to choose the lesser evil? Would it be the just, the biased, or the strong? Would the galaxy be better off if the foundations of the Confederation were destroyed by wiping out the 4 billion human inhabitants on Gactus VII? All the Everdusk members saluted him as he walked by. Word must have gotten out about his mission, a suicide mission to ram his small spaceship into the Xenolifer mothership and their base of operation. Xenolifers were on the verge of executing their plan, but not if Sgt Burden could stop them. Even though Sgt Burden had done some pretty horrid things in his day, he'd never gone so far as to contemplate the atrocity of what Liam was planning. As they fought, the gods would be watching them. The fate of a planet, an empire, and the future of the galaxy rest in the balance, like the sword of Damocles hanging over them. But let's start at the beginning of our story. Usually a pretty good place to start. As the game loads, the Everdusk team sits around a campfire, reminiscing about better days, talking about what they'd do if they got off the planet and survived this ordeal, cursing Liam and Xenolifer for stranding them there. Our story starts 1 year prior to this conversation around the campfire. Chapter 1: Self-Justified Sacrifices. The game opens with a standoff between security forces and Burden and Liam's team. This is back when Liam and Burden took inspiration from each other and worked together. Alongside Jack and Shaman, they're working as agents of Xenolifer, and they are tasked with infiltrating a database to extract information about the deadly Medusa virus, the biological weapon central to Xenolifer's plans, holding 4 people hostage and fighting off the security forces, while Liam taps into the database to try to extract the data they need. Burden is tasked with managing the hostages, holding back the security forces while keeping the network security up, all the while letting Liam do his hacking, occasionally helping him out by charging and deploying a hack boost that Shaman had designed. You can make the hostages more anxious by threatening them or hitting them. You can help them relax by talking to them or sending them to the comfort room to take a breather. You'll be able to tell how they are doing by their posture. Are they laid back, seeming like they're just hanging out? Or are they rocking themselves back and forth, trying to hold back from snapping? If they get too confident or too freaked out, they might make some poor decisions and try to run for safety, leaving you with an ugly decision to either let them go or pull the trigger. To hold off the guards, you can have Jack shoot at them, negotiate with them, or trade hostages for time. Shaman is the data person on the heist. He has to hold off the security forces' attempts to lock them out of the data they are trying to steal, while also charging the hack boost to help accelerate Liam's hacking attempts. But we'll learn more about Shaman's backstory later on. Keep the hostages under control, hold off the security forces, keep network security up, and charge the hack booster. Little by little, the hack bar will fill up a little bit each turn. You don't have to use the hack boost to complete the mission, but it really does help. So this is an introduction to the game's playstyle. After a few tries, you learn some basic guidelines of the balancing act. Keep network security up, keep the guards at distance, release a hostage every now and then. I found that you rarely have to resort to some of the more extreme options, like killing a hostages in my playthrough, but I definitely did use that option the first few times. Ultimately, they're not terribly useful options, but they are consistent with the narrative themes of the game, by presenting more brutal options for you if you so choose. It helps materialize the vibe of the game to the player, by presenting these dubious moral decisions. Though there are future missions where these more brutal options present a far bigger appeal as the situation gets more desperate. But at least for now, it seems like using the violent options isn't the best idea. If you shoot a hostage, you'll put the other ones on edge pretty fast, and it won't take much more for them to try to run. Pretty soon the situation will escalate, and the less hostages you have, the faster the guards approach. So if you're down to 1 or 2 hostages, you'll have very little time to finish the hack. But hold them off you do, and Liam does his work. With the data in hand, the team attempts to escape, but the security forces are able to capture Burden and Jack, leaving Liam and Shaman to get away. A flashback shows us a moment before the siege has started, revealing that Burden is actually an undercover agent working for Everdusk, penetrating Xenolifers on their behalf. Chapter 2: 20 Days of Empty Words. So here's a scenario you don't often see in video games. You are told you have to endure torture without giving away all the information you have. Games like GTA 5 put you in the position of executing the torture. This is one of the few games that put you on the receiving side. You and Jack wake up and realize you're in a torture chamber, strapped to chairs above grates. Must make it easy to clean up any messes. On the wall, you notice a tool set, but you're afraid that today you'll be the crafts project the tools were meant for. 2 other men are in the room with you, one of them having an inhuman amount of muscle, and for some reason wearing a comically small helmet. Why would you need a helmet? Why is the man's head so small? It'd be funny if he wasn't about to torture you. The other one's the only one that speaks, and from his tone, this is the job for him. Each day, in a sing-song manner, he picks a tool to work on you with. What would it be today? Bare hands, a hammer, hot irons, an ancient revolver, pliers. He seems like he's fun at parties. You think he keeps in touch with his mother? He shares a story he seems proud of. He tells you a cyborg that they had to torture one time. Since he was part machine, he could make himself not feel by disconnecting his reception nerves, so they had to find another way to get at him. Over time, the torturer would talk with the cyborg, little by little earning his trust and becoming his friend, eventually learning that the cyborg had a sister. Tragically, that bit of information being revealed would mean the end of the innocent woman's life, as she met her end in front of her now cyborg brother at the hands of the torturers. He seems to enjoy remembering this cruel story. In this chapter, you have to balance two failed states. If you confess too much and give away too much information, the interrogators won't have a need for you and will dispose of you and Jack. If you take too much damage and piss off the interrogators too much, you won't survive until you are rescued. So you need to balance subterfuge, confessions, taking damage, and recovering. Here and there, you can recover some health by having one of the two characters provoke the torturers, successfully lying, and later on when Liam is helping you, using a medkit. Over the days you have to wait to be rescued, Burden and Jack will have to endure sweet little punches, hammer love taps, ouchies from teeth pulling, boops from red hot irons, snip snaps to Jack's arm, the wall stretch-o-matic. At night, you get some more world building and lore from Jack and Burden's conversations as they try to hold out together and keep each other's spirits up. After the first few torture sessions, Liam materializes out of nowhere, dropping down from an opening in the ceiling. Liam tells you there's a rescue mission Xenolifer's putting together, but it would take about 20 days for them to be able to be rescued, so they would have to hold out for torture for nearly 3 weeks. Liam was going to help when he could by bringing them supplies, medicine to heal them, information to help navigate the torturers, painkillers to take the edge off, and the occasional joke to keep their spirits up. After enduring 9 days, you get rescued when the wall was destroyed in an explosion while Liam was in the room with you. Liam manages to hear that these are Everdusk agents, identifying you by a different name than he knew you by, and he realizes that you were never truly with Xenolifer, but you were an Everdusk spy in their organization. He had been risking his life to help a spy that had betrayed his cause. He must have escaped shortly after the explosion so that the Holistic Empire didn't capture him, processing the betrayal he had just witnessed by a man that had inspired him so many times in their quest to rid the galaxy of slavery. Chapter 3, Everdusk. A cutscene shows a briefing that you and a team of specialists are receiving from Everdusk. The Xenolifers have the meduse virus and they are threatening to use it. You, an engineer called Donald, 2 specialists in microbiology, Sarah, who was married to Donald, and Dr. Zenesh, along with Jack and Marvin, are all being sent to planet Senekos, is where the meduse virus originates from. The hopes is to study the virus in its native environment and synthesize an antidote for it, a cure. Jack and Burden were being sent as security and to make sure that everything went smoothly. They hope to have an antidote prepared for when the Xenolifers launch their attack. Enjoying a peaceful moment of normality, we see Burden, Jack, and Marvin enjoying a sunset on the surface of the planet Senekos, taking in the vista of the horizon and the 2 moons in the sky. Before long, Marvin has had a chance to run around in the snow. Jack and Burden head back inside to see the team at work. It was going to be dark and cold out soon. Best get inside. This planet only got 5 hours of sunlight a day, making the nights long and harsh. Sarah and Dr. Zenesh are at the computer looking over molecule simulations. Donald is checking up on his empathy bot, Brandon, and has his defibrillator kit next to him. All of a sudden, out of the entrance come Liam and Shaman again. He laughs at you and tells you that the virus has been released into the atmosphere and you have 27 hours to find an antidote. Then him and his team blow up the entrance to the lab after making their escape. He was doing this to motivate you into finding a cure for the virus. This chapter has 2 conditions that have to be satisfied. 1. The rocks in the rubble must be cleared away so the team has a venue of escaping the lab. And 2. A complete antidote must be synthesized for the virus. Synthesizing the antidote or the cure has to occur as a rush job, so safety measures must be worked around. The goal is to find the correct order of the compounds needed to synthesize the cure. The only problem is that the only way to determine if an antidote works is by testing it on a person or on Marvin. But hey, what's a little human experimentation between friends? Each time you want to see if an antidote works. You have to risk someone in your party by injecting them with the experimental cure. Taking it safe means working slow to make the antidotes, but you only have 27 hours before the virus gets to you, so corners must be cut. To make things more complicated, the process must be done twice, since the antidote has two parts, one for the mental effect and one for the physical effects. Another danger the team must contend with is the possible effects of the virus found in the environment. At random, a team member might be paralyzed by the virus and might need a charge of the defibrillator to be able to get them to move again. And only Donald, the engineer, can charge the defibrillator. The explosion that started the events also cut the cables that power the computer, so Brandon the robot has to hold the wires to charge the battery, allowing the current to travel through him, damaging his internal components. Donald will have to take turns repairing Brandon frequently to allow him to keep working. Jack, Marvin, Burden, Donald, and Brandon can all work towards digging up the rocks to clear the escape. They will have to be monitored for status, and they'll need breaks to rest up every now and then. Except for Brandon, who can just keep digging since he's a robot and technically not alive. After some experimentation and deduction, injecting the trial antidotes into your team members and watching and waiting to see if they will survive. After some dreadful experimentation and deduction, you're able to synthesize the cure, while the digging crew manages to clear the rocks out and forge a way out. The team steps out of the cave, relieved to have survived the ordeal. But regrettably, they find Liam, who had been waiting. You see, this was all part of his plan. Liam wasn't willing to risk his team if they could synthesize the cure, but he was willing to risk your team. This entire time, he had been waiting outside to see if you were able to figure your way out and deliver the cure to the virus to him. This entire time, you have been working your way towards falling into Liam's trap. With the cure in hand, he blows up your only means of escape and to get off the planet, and then he abandons you and your team there. You build a campfire as night falls, and the team gathers around trying to get some of the warmth of the fire in this cold and dark night. This is the scene that played out during the title scene. Chapter 4. Gods will be watching. So I think this is the first mission that might actually push you to doing something evil. It's explained that there is a satellite that will be crossing into radio range soon. If the team is able to repair the radio that they have before it leaves range, they'll be able to radio for help and get off the planet. If not, it'd be another 14 months before the satellite is back in radio range. Surviving on this planet for 22 days seems like enough of a stretch, never mind it over a year. So Sgt Burden's team has to hold out for 22 days in the wild on this alien planet. Your goal is to get the radio fixed before then, managing the team so you don't starve or freeze to death, or lose so much morale that you run off into the forest and disappear. Fending off starvation and the cold for 3 weeks has a visible effect on the party. You can see forlorn glances and casual rocking back and forth, comforting themselves, as if they're trying to wish the situation away. Can't blame them. The feeling of being trapped gets you in a very special way. Being heroic for one moment was one thing. Finding the bravery to endure the elements for 20 days was something completely different. At least the scenery was nice. The two moons in the sky made for great panoramic views. Likewise, the night was lit up a little bit by two bright stars in the sky. These helped Jack keep his orientation when he had to go out hunting at night. Donald and his robot Brandon took turns working on the pile of electronics, gradually molding it into an old-fashioned radio. Who would have thought that this simple technology would still be so useful in the era of space travel? But it's an easy and resilient way to communicate. It's also the easiest way to blast electromagnetic radiation into the atmosphere. Sarah spent her days watching out for the team and talking to them, trying to keep spirits up, helping write speeches to help stir the spirits at night. Speeches about bravery and teamwork did help the team endure the cold and the hunger. Marvin and Jack teamed up to take care of the hunting and getting meat from the local wildlife. Jack's bond with Marvin was obvious. They both provided each other a lot of support. The doctor spent his days watching out for everyone's health, taking care of them if any of them came down with the local natural version of the Medusa virus. Burden had fallen in charge of the firewood and keeping the fire going. Sgt Burden eventually grew to enjoy the walks in the alien woods, looking for firewood. The alien trees, while different from what he was used to, did somehow make him feel better. Nature is nature, I suppose. They worked during the short 5-hour days on Senekos, They talked and shared stories over the long nights. Some days the mood was dire, the entire team facing what time seemed the inevitable, a slow death by hypothermia and starvation. The thought that they might have to live out the rest of their natural lives on this hostile planet, as the virus, if not the environment, claimed them one by one. There were nights when the hunt didn't yield anything and there was hunger. Sometimes the looks on the team could have been a little bit less cannibalistic, but through it all, Marvin was still a good boy. Looking at his laser pistol, Sgt Burden wondered what would be the merciful thing to do. But then again, he knew how all this played out. He had sometimes noticed how the team looked at each other when the food was low. They wouldn't be the first expedition to resort to desperate measures, like the ancient Donner Party on old Earth. Over time, routines were developed, the strange became familiar, and the days passed. Occasionally working through the night, Donald and Brandon are able to repair the radio and call for help. And with that, they were able to call for a rescue and get off the planet Senecos. Something that does strike me as interesting is that arguably, this is the first time in the game that using the kill option on a member of your party isn't necessarily a bad idea. If you're in a situation where you have a few antidotes built up, or you can manage with only one hunter, or you don't need Sarah to manage your morale, you have the option to have one less mouth to feed. There's also the dark implication that if you do kill somebody in your party, you get some meat rations. Of course, the game assumes you managed the situation well, and you didn't force anybody to eat each other. The team is rescued and picked up by Everdusk. We see a cutscene. It's explained that Liam had further engineered the virus so that the original antidote they had developed on Senecos would no longer be useful. So they would need another, more advanced antidote or cure to stop the virus. Sgt Burden sees the inevitable. There is only one option. The only team of scientists that would have the information to engineer this more advanced antidote would be on the mothership of Xenolifer itself. So Sgt Burden would have to find a way to get onto Liam's ship and coerce the cure out of them. And so we see the scene that we saw at the beginning of the video. The team saying goodbye to him as he on his one-way suicide mission to save the world. He gets into his ship and sets off. Remembering what he could of his 7 years since he's been on the desert, he recalls how it all started. Chapter 5, Legend. This chapter was notorious when the game first came out and only had one difficulty level. I cannot tell you how many times my wife and I attempted this stage, easily 20 or 30 times. Even now, 10 years later, I still mention the desert stage to her from the gods we'll be watching. I think this stage stood out to me for really capturing the feeling of being stuck out in the desert so well. I will never forget how many times we wandered the desert on Ligan, Jack's home planet. There's some old threads on Steam that have preserved the saltiness of the era. If you ever wanted to be completely in the hands RNG and pray to RNGesus, this is it. Anybody that played this game when it first came out has these painful memories of the sand dunes on Ligan, traveling with the Marines, and executing Abraham over and over and over again, every single time you attempted the stage. So in this flashback chapter, we find the sergeant walking barefoot in the desert, having somehow survived a spaceship crash. He's also wearing his high-tech Everdusk armor. A Marine from the Federation spots him and notices his Everdusk uniform. The Marine explains that there is active combat on this planet that they're on, the Gin, and that him and his squad fell behind during a retreat. Their evacuation ship is leaving the planet in 124 hours, and if they don't make it to the rally point, they'll be abandoned on this hostile desert planet. Sgt Burden has a beacon that allows him to zero in on the rally signal. Meeting the rest of the Marine squad, you meet Sgt Abraham, the senior most in command. You notice that Sgt Abraham is injured and can barely walk. And at the same time, Sgt Abraham notices your uniform and that technically you outrank him. So you're in control of the Marine squad. He transfers control of the squad to you and tells you to do what is right and what is best. Keep his men alive and get them out of the desert and to the rally point so they can evacuate. And to do whatever you have to do. Seeing how much of the desert you're gonna have to walk, and you can only travel as the slowest person in your team. You look at Sgt Abraham, who had just entrusted his team to you, and you knew what you had to do. You give Jack the order to please kill Sgt Abraham. Better to do it quickly than to leave him stranded out here in the desert, where either the enemy will find him or the elements will get him. He seemed like a good sergeant, that he cared about his men. Why is it that the best of us always go so early? In disgust, a few soldiers strike out on their own, but most of them stay. They knew the cold calculus you had made, and that Abraham would only have slowed them down and caused them all to be abandoned here. Oddly, having less people in your party makes the game easier. You will still have the same amount of water, but less people drinking. I wonder if this was intentional by the developers, making the stage impossible to beat if you had Abraham in your party, to force the player into doing something horrible. Before they set off, Jack takes Sgt Abraham's dog tags. Eventually, that will be the name that Burden assumes when he goes undercover with Xenolifer. The desert was massive, hot, and dry. To make things worse, there are 2 suns in the sky, meaning that this planet has perpetual sunlight. You will only be able to rest when you find something that gives you shade, but the soldiers march on. The desire for life and the desire to survive is strong. And Sgt Burden and the group of Marines head off to the southwest, the direction from which they were picking up the rally beacon signal from. They'll encounter enemy patrols and bases, managing their water, sending scouts up ahead before moving, to prevent any surprises, sleeping only under rocks or in bases after pushing the enemy out. Slowly, the group makes its way to the southwest, gradually picking up a stronger and stronger signal from the beacon that gives them more and more hope, until one day they get the news from one of the scouts that they have been waiting for. They've made it. They will not die in this desert, and they will get to live another day. Some of the men start jumping up and down, some break down and cry. Could you blame them? They had all just thought that they would die a painful death, gradually getting a heat stroke as they dehydrated under 2 baking desert suns. Jack gives the amnesiac that had made their survival possible Sgt Abraham's dog tags, and says if this man doesn't have an identity and a name, that he could honor Sgt Abraham's sacrifice and take his identity. This way, Sgt Abraham's memory will live on. So the desert chapter was a flashback, and we see the first time the protagonist, Burden, meets Jack. Who would have thought that they would have become such good friends when their first interaction was Burden asking Jack to execute Sgt Abraham. Sgt Burden takes the dog tags and agrees. We cut back to the present time, and Sgt Burden on his suicide mission. Chapter 6. Suicide Mission to Save the World. Sgt Burden's on his way to the Xenolifer mothership. After an awesome intro and epic music, the stakes are laid out. The virus has been released on the planet, and a massive screen projects the damage done by the virus on the population below, on the planet Gactus VII. How many on the surface would die by the time you manage to get the enhanced antidote from the Xenolifers, now that they've upgraded an already deadly virus? It is the powerful that shape the world, not the just. Sgt Burden makes his way to the lab and takes everybody there hostage. Each person in that room, aside from the child, will have one part of the password that you need to unlock the advanced cure. Your goal is to get each person to talk and give you their part of the password. So the balancing act is to press them and erode their resolve to resist, but without pushing them too far that they'll try to overpower you. Another ticking clock is the fact that your explosive entrance is causing the oxygen to vent out. So if the oxygen hits 0%, all surviving hostages will suffocate. You can release hostages via an escape pod to preserve oxygen and reduce how many people are breathing. So the natural conclusion is that once you get a password portion from somebody, you let them go to preserve oxygen. Each person has to be approached a different way. Ford can be reasoned with and doesn't want to see his family hurt, which is the couple and his grandson. Walter breaks easy under threats and hits. Claire and Frank are parents, and they can be reasoned with and threatened, as long as you don't hurt their child. hurting the kid is the easiest way to fail the mission, and freeing him really lowers the parents' resistance. So again, the game gives you the option to be cruel, which gives some narrative and mechanical consistency to the game, but the mechanics of the game will actually push you away from the more violent options. Here's the funny thing about the way I approached it. Since you're basically deducing a password, you can always figure out the last one by elimination. So technically, you don't have to get everybody's password, you get one freebie. So I shot Shaman every time in the face. He has the highest resistance and he annoyed me. Little did I know at the time what the next chapter held in store. Okay, so shoot Shaman, free the child, hit Walter, reason with Ford, persuade, and rough up Frank and Claire, all while watching the population counter decrease by hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, victims to Xenolifer's custom-made virus. They would perish as part of the planet's collective punishment for the crime of slavery. One by one, you get the password segments you need. You're able to synthesize a cure to stop the mass death occurring on the planet below, which is actively depopulating of humans. You wonder how many lives are destroyed every second. You enter the password segments into the computer, you get the cure that you need, and now your mission is almost complete. One more encounter with Liam. Chapter 7, Nemesis. The last confrontation between Liam and Burden. Liam is known to be the younger and more capable fighter than Burden. You would tend to fight over and over again as Liam gets the best of you. Here we see Burden seemingly remember the previous loops and starts telling Liam that they have had this conversation before. Burden mentions that he's able to read Liam's moves over time, iteration after iteration. Burden's advanced knowledge of time negates Liam's skill and speed advantage, since Burden started learning what Liam was going to do before even Liam knew. Burden appears to be stuck in time, starting with the mission in the desert 7 years ago, when he was discovered with amnesia, and ending up here, shortly after this confrontation, when they would decide the fate of a planet and a galaxy. So you jump back when Liam's arm goes low, duck when his guard is high, block, fake when he kicks. Over dozens of loops, Burden learned Liam's fighting style and defeated him. After the fight, he holds the antidote as he looks out on the planet and has to decide the fate of billions. Thinking about the time loop that Burden apparently has been in, and how Burden has mentioned that he has lived up to this point maybe millions of times, you realize that Burden gave the order to execute Abraham millions of times as well. Why did the stream of time have it in for poor old Sgt Abraham, standing on the damaged mothership with Liam defeated on his knees? Sgt Burden looks at the prepared aerolized antidote. All he had to do to stop the virus was to throw the vial at the planet. Gravity would pull it in, and once the cure enters the atmosphere, it would start spreading and neutralizing the virus. Or he could throw the cure away, and let Liam's plan play out. Sgt Burden chooses mercy, and throws the vial at the planet, stopping Liam's bioengineered slaughter on Gactus VII. With that, Sgt Burden explains that he had been wondering if this was all predetermined, if he was truly the one making his own choices, or if he was being controlled. With that, he looks at a nearby nebula and jumps, slowly gliding through space towards the nebula until he is enveloped by it. And with that ends the base game. But one more DLC chapter was released, called Commitment, Regret, Temptation, and Sacrifice. So let's check it out. So when I started writing this script in my head, I remember when I first played this game when it came out in the early 2010s, thinking about the themes and the plot, and generating a general idea of how I want the script to go. When I went back to replay it for this video, I saw that the DLC had been released, and of course I wanted to check it out. What I didn't expect was the DLC to be quite so different from the base game. Little did I know that it changed so much. So this is the chapter in the game that has the most exposition. At times, it almost feels like you're playing a playable novel. There is a lot more dialogue and a lot more detail and history. It also adds a lot to the characters, their personalities, and the world. After a 20-year time jump, we learn about time travel, more about the alien races of the galaxy, parallel universes, ancient alien races, and of course what has happened in the 20 years since the end of the main game. So, 20 years since Sgt Burden saved Gactus V, the Constellar Federation kept expanding and kept getting more and more cruel and corrupt. It had managed to overcome all remaining opposition in the galaxy, expanding its reach as far as civilization could go. Never satisfied, it had enslaved every known alien race. And eventually that wasn't enough. Eventually the Constellar Federation also started enslaving humans from planets that had fallen out of favor with the central government, regardless if their offenses to the central government were real or imagined. The question is asked, what would be kinder, saving Gactus VII and allowing the Confederation to conquer the galaxy, dooming trillions of humans and aliens, or letting the Medusa virus do its job and eradicate the population of Gactus VII, shaking the foundations of the Confederation? This is the world of gods will be watching 20 years after Sgt Burden drifted into a nebula. His old team, back together and now working with Liam and Shaman, were going to find that nebula and rescue Burden. This is the chapter where the characters got more interesting and fleshed out. After 20 years, Sarah has become a survivalist sharpshooting badass, having been scarred by her experience in Senecos, having been unable to hunt, fight, or lead. Never again, she said. In the years since the confrontation with the Xenolifer mothership, she had taken military and rifle training with Jack, learned to shoot, and become an independent leader. Sadly, at some point her and Donald separated. Liam is now the protagonist. He had been spending the last 2 decades trying to figure out what happened to Sgt Burden and how did the time loop work. Could they go back in time and make a different decision? Dr. Zenesh is now a billionaire who had been financing the expedition. He became rich off of selling the cure for the virus. Shaman has a whole new backstory that reveals him as a human orphan raised by a race of ancient time-traveling aliens, Opmanhun. Really makes me feel bad how interesting he's become, given how many times I started chapter 6 and immediately shot him in the face. Jack's still around, having spent some time training with Sarah, training her in combat skills. He still had the same disenchanted tone of voice when speaking. Marvin isn't mentioned. I mean, would have been so outlandish for there to be some gene therapy or miracle cure that extended a dog's natural lifetime. Something that allowed Marvin to be in the DLC 20 years later. But no, not a mention. Wherever he is, he was a good boy. So, the team is on their way on this ship and trip financed by the Doctor's wealth. Liam leading Burden's old team, they finally found the nebula. Their goal is to convince Burden that Gactus VII must be wiped out, dooming billions to save trillions, so that on his next time loop, he doesn't save the planet and makes a different decision, deciding to let the Xenolifer's plan play out. The opposite of what happened at the end of the base game. They aren't really sure if this will change things in their reality, or if it would create a branching timeline, but they decide it's worth a try. Flying into the nebula, the crew is blinded by a flash, and they all lose consciousness. Coming to, they wake up on the surface of an alien planet nearby. The planet of the Opmahun, the extinct alien race that had the ability to perceive time the same way we perceive space, and had raised Shaman. The Opmanhuns see time as a multi-dimensional tapestry that you move across freely, or at least look across. They had taken in a few human children to raise, and Shaman had been one of them. But that was before the Constellar Federation wiped them out. So crash landing here was kind of a tragic return home for him. He would become a valuable source of information, being able to tell you about the lore and history of the Opmahun, along with their history and culture. He's also the only member of the team that's able to decipher and read their writings. Shaman explains that the Opmahun see, experience, and feel time pass completely different than how humans do. They would be able to use one of their devices that resemble temples that have been spread out across the surface to tap into the time loop that Burden is in and pull him out. They would have to climb the tallest mountain they can see, on foot since their spaceship wouldn't be flying again anytime soon. They would need to brave the altitude and the cold to make it, all in hopes to be able to see Burden again, rewrite time, and possibly save the galaxy from the brutality of the Confederation, while simultaneously dooming an entire planet. To make matters worse, Shaman had sustained a leg injury in the crash and would have to be carried by the team. The challenge in this chapter is leading the team up the mountain before the source of heat runs out. They'll take turns leading the expedition, carrying Shaman, and the power supply which generates heat for them. So the challenge here is the cold, exhaustion, and the ticking clock that is the finite energy supply. At different points in the climb, you'll encounter Opmahun relics, each with a different theme, presenting a conundrum. Do you carry the stone of commitment? Do you give in to the wise man's temptation? Do you accept the offer to undo a regret? At the regret altar, Donald gets asked if he would like to use a wish granted by the powers that be, the Opmanhun, to make Sarah fall in love with him again. Sarah is understandably horrified at the thought of some supernatural or magical power taking her free will from her, possibly undoing the new stronger persona she had forged for herself since separating from Donald, with combat training and having become far more assertive and confident. In my playthrough, Donald made the more unkind choice. I just couldn't convince myself that coercing somebody into a relationship by stripping them of their free will is going to work out well for anybody, aside from the horrifying thought of someone being robbed of their agency. I like the thought that Donald understood Sarah was in a better place and needed to let her go. And maybe he realized this new, more independent, stronger Sarah was happier, and that was better for her. And maybe that was better for him too. Little by little, the team climbed on, the background changing, getting darker, the atmosphere fading as they ascended. We see images and flashbacks of Burden and the events that happened 20 years ago. Liam starts to get lightheaded as the oxygen thins, and he starts to hallucinate and break the fourth wall, even referring to you by your Steam account name. More images flashing, and the team continues climbing, eventually seeing the nebula in the background. Finally, they make the summit and are able to summon Burden back, and they explain what has happened to him, and they explain what has happened to the galaxy in the 20 years that have passed, asking him to make a different decision and allow the Xenolifer's genocidal plan play out in the next time loop that he encounters. Liam explains to Burden that while only seconds or minutes have passed for him, it's been 2 decades for everybody else. Burden is glad to see his old team and see that they're still doing well after all this time. Burden steps back into the nebula, continuing the time loop, and the loop begins again. Next, we see the endings of the base game again, but this time, when the climatic decision has to be made, we no longer have the option to save Gactus VII. We only have the option to let the Xenolifer plan play out. Burden wonders if he really has any free will, if somebody was controlling him. Does he have the power to make his own decisions? Knowing what would happen to the galaxy, the Constellar Federation didn't fall. He throws away the antidote, leaving the 4 billion humans on the surface to perish, but sparing the rest of the galaxy the fate of being underneath the boot of a slaving empire that would conquer all life and civilization in the galaxy. And with this final act, the story of gods we'll be watching ends, leaving the question of what would happen in the future without the Confederation. Hopefully, a kinder future would emerge. Who were the gods that Burden was talking to, and how did he end up in the time loop to begin with? Were Liam and Burden the gods mentioned in the title, controlling the fate of one planet and consequently the galaxy? Were we the gods controlling the events of the game? Either way, I enjoyed the journey and the unique mechanics of the game, along with the moral conundrums. The world building, especially in the DLC, gets very interesting. I kind of wish that there was a sequel that they could flesh out a little bit more about this universe. But anyway, thank you very much for watching. Please like and subscribe if you like this type of content and like to support the channel. And I do want to give a shout out to Paul G, who has now officially become the first member of my channel. Thank you very much for your support. You're effectively paying for one of my AI bills. So thank you, I appreciate it. And thank you for watching this far, and have a good one. See you soon.